Welcome to our faux real calligraphy lessons. Before we get started with learning the letters, I wanted to talk about guidelines really quick. So the sheet that I'll be writing on has these guidelines, horizontal lines and some slanted lines. And when you're practicing, you definitely want to be writing on lined paper. So you can just use regular lined paper, or if you want, you can download these exact sheets. I'll put a link in the description of this video, and there will be two PDFs. The one I'm using right now is called Large Guidelines. So if you want, you can download that and print it and use as we go through the letters, or you can just use regular lined paper. You're also going to need some type of writing tool. You can use anything that is monoline, and monoline just means that the thickness of the line doesn't change as you write. So most calligraphy pens, as you're writing, the thickness of the line will change based on either the pressure or the direction you're writing, but for faux calligraphy, you don't need a pen like that. You can use anything, a pencil, a pen. This is a Tombow Mono Twin pen, and it actually has two tips. There's one on the other side, but something that writes in a thin line. Okay, before we learn the letters, I'm going to teach you some of the basic shapes that will make up the letters. And these are the shapes that you learn when you're learning calligraphy, and these will be the basics of how to form the letters. So I'll show you the basic shapes, and then I'll teach you how to shade them and how you will know where to shade the letters, or the letters, after you learn how to make these shapes. So the first shape is just called an entrance stroke, and it's just a thin line that goes upward. And then after that we have a shape called the underturn, and that's this U shape. You don't need to memorize the names of these for right now, but I just want to show you the basics. Okay, so then we have an overturn, which is just an upside down U. And then we have an oval. So the way I'm using these guidelines, you can see I'm just using one line as the baseline and one line as the header line and fitting the shapes in between the lines. I'm also kind of writing at a slant, which is what these slanted lines will assist you with. Okay, next we have compound curve, which is like a combination of starting with this shape and ending with this shape. And the last two are loops, stem loops. The first one is ascending, which means it goes above the top line. So this is called the baseline, this is called the header line, and then we have the ascending lines. So I'm just going to put an A for ascending. And this loop starts at the header line, and then you go up and make a loop around and come back down. Then we also have a descending loop, so I'm going to put a D for descending, which means it goes below. So we're going to start again at the header line, go below, loop around, and come back in. Alright, so these are the shapes. And to add the shading, so what makes it look like calligraphy, and what we'll learn through this faux calligraphy, is how to add thick lines to some parts of the letters and how to keep some of them thin. So the question is, where do you add the thick lines? Well, you add them when you're making a downstroke. So for this shape, we started at the bottom and went up, so there's no downstroke, so this doesn't have any thickness. This shape, we started up here and came down and back up, so we went down, back up. And I'm going to draw this a little closer. Okay, so down and back up, and over here we went up, around, and down. So for these two shapes, we have a downstroke here, a downstroke here. So that's how you know where to add the shade. You add the shade on the downstroke. Okay, now where on this shape do you want to add it? So the basic rule is that you want to keep the width of this shape the same. You don't want to change that width. What I mean by that is all of these have a certain width. And when you add the shade, you want to make it so that you're not changing the width. So that means you want to add it on the inside of the shape. So you're adding it on the inside of the shape along the downstroke. So here's the downstroke, and we're adding the shade on the inside. Okay, for this shape, we're going to add it on the inside along the downstroke. Okay, now for the oval. If you start up here, or no matter where you start the oval, you should be making it in this direction, which means on this side is a downstroke, this side is an upstroke. So we'll add it on the side with the downstroke on the inside of the shape. Okay. Now for this shape is the compound curve. We went up, and then in the middle we went down and back up. And now you want to make the thicknesses of these shades the same as each other. I can see that this one is a little thicker than this one, but when you're writing a word, you want to make the thicknesses the same. So for this compound curve shape, I'm going to show this over here. For the compound curve, if I want to add thickness on the downstroke, but I want it to be the same thickness as this, then you would add half the amount of thickness on one side of the line and half the amount of thickness on the other side of the line. Now, when you're actually writing this shape, if you want to leave this gap in here, it would look weird if you came back in and filled in the left side and the right side of this line. So what I usually like to do is, as I'm drawing this shape, I like to come over and trace the right side of that line and come back up. So that makes this hump of the curve wider than this hump. So do you see how right now this distance is wider than this distance? And that's because I want to come back in and add a shade on the inside of that line. Okay, so rather than adding a shade on both sides like this, because then you have a line going down the middle, if you come over and make this first hump a little wider, and then you can come back in and add the shade on the inside. And you can do it this way if you want to fill in your lines at the end like I did here. But if you want to leave them blank, or we'll show you some cool techniques where you can fill in this gap with some patterns, then you would want to make it this way. And that just helps. So then the result, if I do it in black, I'll do it right here. So I'm going to make this one a little wider, and then make this a little thinner. And then I'll add the shade on the inside. So that's what the result is, and then these end up being about the same. Okay? And if it's more comfortable for you to first make the left-hand side and make this hump skinnier and this hump wider and add the shade on the right, that's fine too. Okay, now our last two are the ascending and descending stem loops. And for this one, again, you want to add the shade on the inside. So when you're making this loop, you want to make sure the loop is wide enough so that when you do add the shade, you're not completely closing off the loop. And then same with this descending stem loop. Now you'll notice right here, and I left a gap when I originally wrote that. Let me do this down here. So I came up and around, and then I left this, sorry, that line wasn't very straight, but I leave this gap right here so that when I come back down and fill in the thickness, if I want to leave this blank, then we won't have a line coming through. So this is what not to do. If you come down and meet up with that line, and then you add the shade, you'll have this black line going through. Again, if you're going to end up filling in at the end, that's fine because you'll cover the line. But this is just a helpful tip if you want to leave it blank. Okay, and then same with the, so again, this is my base and header line and ascender. Then for the descending stem loop, it starts by going down and making a loop. And you can stop a little bit before you reach that line so that you can come back in, and when you add the shade, you leave the gap right there. Okay. When we're writing letters, you'll see that it might be easier for the descending stem loop to start with the inside line, come around, and then add shade on the outside. So in that case, I would come down and make the loop a little narrower than if I started with the outside. Then come back in and add shading on the outside. Okay, so these are the basic strokes that we will be using to form all the letters. As we go through the letters, I'll remind you of some of these rules, and I'll show you exactly how to write each letter using these shapes, putting them together, and where to add the shade. So I would practice some of these shapes first so you get the hang of it, and then we can move on to the first 3 letters of the alphabet.